January 1944. The cargo bay of a U.S. Army transport ship groans as its doors open to the icy morning air. Inside, hundreds of German prisoners stand shoulder to shoulder, exhausted from weeks at sea. Their boots scrape against the metal ramp. As they step out, expecting anger, hostility, maybe even revenge, instead, they find a quiet American dock, guarded but calm, with military police standing in neat rows, rifles at ease. The prisoners stare in disbelief. Behind the soldiers lies an expanse of open land, no ruins, no bomb craters, no smoke rising from shattered cities, only warehouses, long wooden piers, and a waiting line of buses. Some of the men blink against the sunlight, confused by the stillness. For many, this is their first glimpse of the United States, a world far removed from the collapsing fronts they left behind. The guards call out orders. The tone is firm, but not cruel. The Germans exchange uneasy glances. Nothing about this feels like the brutal captivity they feared. And as those buses begin rolling inland, a larger truth about these camps is about to unfold. The arrival of German POWs on American soil was not an accident of war. It was a consequence of a strategic shift that began in 1942 and accelerated rapidly after the North African Campaign. Following the surrender of the Afrika Korps in May 1943, the Allies suddenly had tens of thousands of German prisoners they could no longer house in the Middle East or Britain. The United States, still far from the front lines and rich in land and resources, agreed to accept a massive share. This decision triggered a nationwide construction effort. Camps were placed in wide rural regions where escape was difficult, yet daily life could be structured and controlled. Texas became a major hub, hosting more than 70,000 POWs. Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma, Colorado, and Georgia followed. By the end of 1945, more than 370,000 German prisoners lived in over 500 U.S. camps, an enormous logistical undertaking that demanded strict adherence to the 1929 Geneva Convention. American policymakers knew the world was watching. Treatment of POS would shape diplomatic relations, influence propaganda battles, and set moral precedent. The War Department issued guidelines ensuring prisoners received adequate food, shelter, medical care, and recreation, not out of charity, but because the United States wanted to demonstrate the principles it claimed to defend. The camps varied in size, but their structure was similar. Long rows of wooden barracks, mess halls, infirmaries, and recreation fields. Watchtowers stood at each corner, and perimeter fences encircled every site. Inside, life followed a strict schedule. Prisoners woke early, completed roll call, and worked in labor programs that supported the American economy, particularly agriculture. By mid-war, German POWs were harvesting cotton in Texas, canning tomatoes in the Midwest, building irrigation channels, repairing roads, and even assisting in lumber operations across Oregon and Washington. Food became one of the most startling contrasts for the prisoners. The U.S. Army supplied them the same rations issued to American soldiers, something almost unimaginable in war-torn Europe. Bread, meat, vegetables, coffee, and fruit appeared on the tables with regularity. Many German prisoners later recalled this as their first real nourishment in years. But the most shocking aspect was not the food. It was the normalcy. Camps were controlled, but not oppressive. Educational programs, music groups, theater clubs, woodworking workshops, and libraries emerged as the months passed. Some camps even allowed supervised visits to local American farms, where German prisoners worked side by side with civilians. For many of these men, this gentle reality clashed sharply with everything they had been told about the United States. They had expected brutality or at least harsh discipline. Instead, they found routines that bordered on predictable comfort. This gap between expectation and reality is where the story begins to deepen. The human shock came first. Many German prisoners had been captured after months of retreat, hunger, and relentless bombing. Their last images of Europe were burning towns and collapsing armies. To step into an American camp clean, organized, and stocked with supplies felt surreal. Some later wrote that they were embarrassed by how poorly equipped they had been compared to the abundance they saw here. Others struggled with guilt, wondering why their own families back home lacked the basics that appeared on tables in a country untouched by destruction. This emotional contrast became the root of deeper introspection. From a tactical standpoint, the POW system served a practical purpose. With millions of American soldiers deployed overseas, labor shortages threatened farms and infrastructure. German prisoners filled that gap. The work programs were carefully structured to comply with international law, but the productivity was real. Prisoners harvested crops, repaired machinery, and often performed tasks that local communities desperately needed. This created an odd wartime coexistence. Enemies, contributing to the stability of the very nation fighting their homeland. Leadership inside the camps varied, but the overarching philosophy remained consistent: discipline without cruelty. U.S. commanders understood that humane treatment prevented unrest, discouraged escape attempts, and reinforced America's image. Officers instituted clear rules: no weapons for prisoners, mandatory roll calls, restricted movement, but also ensured access to medical care, religious services, and organized recreation. A balanced approach emerged, blending security with respect. Many German officers expressed cautious admiration for the professionalism they observed. What shocked many prisoners most was how Americans separated political ideology from personal treatment. Diaries recovered years later reveal entries filled with confusion. Some wrote about guards who shared cigarettes with them. Others commented on the variety of food or the opportunity to read books banned in Germany. And a recurring theme appeared: the realization that American democracy was not the chaotic, weak system Nazi propaganda had described. Even hardened believers felt a slow erosion of certainty, and inside that erosion, the seeds of a turning point began to form. The true turning point arrived between 1944 and early 1945, when the camps reached maximum capacity and internal conflicts began to surface. As new prisoners arrived from Normandy and the collapsing Eastern Front, ideological tensions deepened. Not all German POWs held the same beliefs. Many enlisted men were conscripts with little political loyalty, while certain officers and fanatics attempted to enforce Nazi discipline behind the fences. This created a hidden battleground inside the camps. In several locations, secret groups formed, attempting to intimidate prisoners who expressed admiration for American life or questioned the war. These groups circulated underground messages, warning others not to show weakness. In extreme cases, men suspected of disloyalty were beaten. Camp commanders quickly noticed the shift. The United States chose not to ignore it. Special barracks were established to separate hardline ideologues from moderate or apolitical prisoners. This division fundamentally changed the atmosphere inside many camps. For countless German POWs, it was the first time they openly rejected intimidation from within their own ranks. But the most decisive shift came from something unexpected: education. In late 1944, the War Department quietly launched a re-education initiative. The program, including publications like Der Ruf the Call, aimed to expose German prisoners to democratic ideas, factual war news, and accounts of Nazi crimes that many refused to believe. The content avoided humiliation. Instead, it presented thoughtful arguments and factual descriptions, trusting prisoners to draw their own conclusions. The response surprised even the Americans. Many prisoners read the material eagerly, curious about the world beyond propaganda. Others, previously devout in their loyalty, began to question what they had fought for. The combination of humane treatment, steady food, honest information, and the visible contrast between American prosperity and German devastation created a psychological fracture. For some, this was the moment when they realized the Germany they served had led them down a destructive path. And within the quiet barracks of distant American camps, personal transformations quietly unfolded, setting the stage for the final chapters of their captivity. When Germany surrendered in May 1945, the atmosphere inside the U.S. camps shifted overnight. Many prisoners feared harsh punishment, but instead found the routines unchanged. The United States was preparing for a careful, organized repatriation process, one that would take months due to global transportation demands. During this period, another wave of shock struck the prisoners, the realization that American guards were not eager for revenge. Some returned to work programs, others attended classes or spent long hours in camp libraries. Religious groups visited, offering comfort without political pressure. Newcomers from Europe, exhausted, thin and traumatized, struggled to understand how captivity here felt so different from the war they had left behind. In documented interviews decades later, countless former POWs described the same recurring memories: full plates of food, honest treatment, open skies, and the first sense of physical safety they had felt since the war began. A number openly admitted that what they experienced in America reshaped their worldview permanently. By late 1945 and 1946, train after train carried German POWs to ports where they boarded ships home. For many Americans, the departure passed quietly, but for the prisoners, it was a moment of deep internal conflict. They were returning to a homeland destroyed by total war, where cities lay in ruins and families struggled to survive. Some feared resentment from their own people, who assumed captivity overseas had been harsh. Others worried they would be judged for acknowledging the humanity of their former enemy. Yet many carried something new with their memories of fairness, order, and unexpected dignity. Historians later recorded that a significant number of former POWs emigrated to the United States after the war, citing their time in the camps as the defining experience that shaped their decision. The long-term consequences of these camps extended beyond personal stories. They influenced West German Reconstruction, contributed to a shift away from extremist ideologies, and became case studies in post-war reconciliation. Reports from the International Red Cross and interviews with former prisoners repeatedly highlighted the same point. Humane treatment had achieved something no battlefield victory could accomplish. And as these men stepped back into the shattered remains of their homeland, the memory of those faraway American camps followed them into the new era of Europe. The story of German POWs in the United States stands as one of the most revealing chapters of the Second World War, not because of dramatic escapes or harsh captivity, but because of the quiet power of decency. In a world consumed by violence, the American decision to uphold humane standards created an outcome few could have predicted. It turned prison camps into unexpected lessons, reshaping the beliefs of men who had lived under years of propaganda and fear. These camps demonstrated that strength in war does not come only from armies or weapons. It also comes from values simple, steady, unforced. For thousands of prisoners, daily routines inside wooden barracks offered a comparison between two worlds, one built on coercion and another on structured fairness. That comparison lingered long after the war ended. The impact echoed across generations. Many former POWs later said that the first time they questioned the ideology they grew up with was not in a battlefield trench, but in a quiet American camp, sitting at a table with a hot meal. That moment of clarity, born from unexpected treatment, reveals a deeper truth about the war. History remembers destruction and defeat, but it also remembers how people behaved when the world was collapsing. The German prisoners who walked through those camp gates discovered something their commanders had never prepared them for, a form of strength that did not rely on fear. And that realization, carried home across oceans, became part of the broader rebuilding of Europe, proof that even in the darkest conflicts, the way a nation treats its enemy can shape the peace that follows. Thank you for watching this video.